in the drop in the unskilled wage than I have in the skilled wage. My skilled premium has gone up. The bonus for being a skilled worker, the extent to which the skilled wage exceeds the unskilled wage, is greater now as a result of the differences in migration than it was before the migration. So the rise in the skilled premium, skilled workers, everybody's making more. We would have gotten that if we'd drawn on here our demand curves. Probably would have been useful. But the skilled workers are making a lot more than the unskilled workers because the unskilled workers are such a huge increase in supply because of the nature of the immigration pattern. Question? All right. So what do we know so far? We know that wages were increasing over the antebellum period, that is the period before the Civil War. We know that the agricultural labor force was going down, which means we were getting an increase in the waged labor force. We know that there had been important transportation developments in the antebellum period, which had led to increased specialization in trade. We know that this commercialization of agriculture, particularly in New York, had led to a decline in household production. We saw that graph the other day, and I'll show it to you again in just a minute. And all of this, pulling all of that information together, what we get is an increased incidence of poverty and an increased need for poor relief. That is, for some sort of safety net for the wage worker who finds themselves experiencing poverty. Poor relief is not a New Deal creation. A lot of people think that we didn't have welfare programs, we didn't have poor relief until the New Deal in the 1930s. That's not true. What we got in the 1930s in the New Deal was we got a federalization of existing state and local programs. There had been poor relief all the way along. An article by Joan Hannon looks at poor relief starting in the 1820s in New York. Poor relief is not something new to the 20th century. States and localities had run programs where they had provided relief, be it cash relief or other forms of aid throughout the antebellum period. What we're going to look at is the work that Joan Hannon did studying New York State in the poor relief in the mid-1800s. When she did the work, Joan Hannon was an assistant professor here in the Department of Economics, and the data that she used for this study is all in the NRLF. It's all in the storage for the library. The Berkeley Library, you're at the best public institution in the world. And one of the things that makes us one of the best colleges and the best public institution in the world is the extent of the resources that we have in our libraries. Take advantage of them before you graduate. All right. So she's going to look at, or she did look at indoor relief and outdoor relief. Indoor relief means that you're poor, you go to the local officials for help, and they tell you have to move into the poorhouse or the almshouse. So almshouse is another word for poorhouse. So these were institutions that people would live in for a while that they lived in when they couldn't afford to live on their own. Or you would go to the authorities and ask for relief, and they would give you cash, and that would be called outdoor relief. So indoor relief means you're going to live in the almshouse or the poorhouse. Outdoor relief means you're going to get some sort of a cash voucher of some sort that you can use for food or housing as you wish. An important part of understanding the story is having a sense of the state of New York. So here's New York. It's that state right there. I'll circle it for you. And New York City is way down here at the bottom. So New York City, where they also had a lot of snow over the weekend. New York City is way down here where Long Island juts out and forms Long Island Sound between New York and Connecticut. And if you've been to Manhattan, Manhattan is an island. It feels like a peninsula, but it's actually an island, which means there's rivers on either side. So when you're in Manhattan, on one side of you is, on the east side of you is the East River, which would be on your right as you're looking uptown, and on the left side of you is the Hudson River. So the Hudson River goes from Long Island Sound up and basically parallels the border. It's one of the few times they didn't let the river be the border. I don't know what that's about, right? Most of the other times the river is the border, but in New York, the river is 15 minutes by car west of the border between New York and the New England states. Kind of weird. So that's the Hudson River, which we looked at the previous day. And it's a nice wide river. You can float boats down it pretty easily. There's not a lot of snags that you have to worry about, which is to say there's not a lot of places where the trees are sticking up and catch the bottom of the boat and tear it apart because it's so wide all the way down. And then the Erie Canal was built from Lake Erie, which is this lovely little lake here, from Lake Erie across and connects up with the Hudson River here at Albany. I mentioned the Erie Canal when we talked about canals. It's still there. I went down, I looked at the locks when we were back there last year. You can bike along it 336 miles from one end to the other. I didn't do the whole thing. But it's an important part of our story. So when she talks about New York, she's going to talk about the Erie Canal. She's going to talk about New York City, looking at New York without looking at New York City, because that seems to be such a huge city, and even today it throws off any analysis of the upstate part and the area around the Erie. What we saw the other day when we talked about transportation, we saw this map, and this is an important fact, is that once the Erie Canal is put into place, the degree of household production, and particularly this is measuring household manufacture of woolen cloth, declines. So once people are able to get the wheat to market pretty easily, then there is a huge opportunity cost to taking time away from farming in order to manufacture your own wool, in order to have your own what's the word I want for that? Spinning thing. In order to have your own spinning thing and make your own wool, takes time away from other activities on the farm. Once it's pretty cheap to get your goods to market, then the opportunity cost of spinning your own wool is quite high. We see a big decrease in the number of spinning wheels in estates once people die. That's one of the ways they measure the extent of household production. It's not the only way. And that the move of doing your own spinning goes away from the farms that are bordering on the Erie Canal and into the areas that are still in the hinterlands that don't have any easy transportation from their farms to market. All right, what do we get? Relieved pauperism rate in New York. 1823, 1% up to 1859, 7%. So this is the share of the population that was receiving some form of support in each of those years. 6.8 is a pretty big number. 1974, which was a big recession, we had about 6.9% of the population receiving public assistance. I tried to look up some numbers before class on how many people are receiving public assistance now. The public assistance that we offer on the federal level has changed so much that it's pretty hard to do a comparison. So we now have 10F, which is temporary assistance to needy families. You can only be on 10F for a 2-year spell at any one time and for 5 years over your lifetime. And so not surprisingly, now that 10F has been in place since 1996, the share of the population that's receiving support has gone way down. So the numbers I pulled up this morning make it look like only about 2.5% of families today are receiving cash assistance through the temporary assistance for needy families program. It's administered at the state level, funded at the federal level. Who are the paupers? Table 13 from the handout from last week. They are disproportionately male in the 1840s and disproportionately female in the 1850s. So we get a decrease in the number of men over time. They are native born. About 40-45% are native born. They're not largely disabled or elderly people, so it's not the old grandmas who are going in for aid. They are largely able-bodied adults. So in the 1840s, 40% of the people receiving relief were able-bodied adults. By the 1850s, 72% of the people who are receiving relief are able-bodied adults. Of those able-bodied adults, a decreasing number are alcoholics, which is to say intemperate. A very small share are debauched, which would be immoral, probably related to prostitution, has to do with sexual behavior. A small share are idle and vagrant, and a very large share, over 50% of the people receiving relief in the 1850s, are what are called indigent and destitute, which simply means poor for no other good reason. So they're not old, they're not disabled, they're not debauched, they're not drunks, they're simply poor. This shows you the same information, but in a pie chart. I don't know what I think of pie charts, but there you go. And shows you particularly the increase, which is the focus, the increase in the share of the people receiving relief who are indigent and destitute. Now, at the time, in the 1800s, a lot of people thought that those individuals who were receiving relief because of some flaw in their personal character. So they were lazy, they had moral failings, they were just bad people, and that's why they were receiving relief. It's not an unfamiliar characteristic stereotype. We hear some of those same things today of folks who receive relief. And what Hannon's looking at is there any credence both to that stereotype, which we had in the 1800s as well as in the 2000s, and is there support in the data for the standard historian story, which is that the rise of poor relief is a result of urbanization, industrialization, and immigration. So that's what we're going to look at. Urbanization, the way to measure urbanization is to look at what's happening to population and to the growth rate of population, so the percentage change in population. And if it's true that we have a rising share of the overall population that's receiving poor relief because of urbanization, then it should be that in counties in which the population is growing very rapidly, which is going to be consistent with urbanizing, you should have a higher share of poor. So both the counties that already have a large population and therefore have urban settings, and the populations that are growing rapidly should have more poor than do the counties in which the share of in which the population is smaller or in which the population is growing more slowly. Industrialization, looking at industrialization, we're going to look at the share of the labor force that is non-agricultural. If it's true that industrialization is one of the causes of the increase in relief over the antebellum period in New York, then what we should see is that as the share of non-agricultural jobs or wages in a county rises, we should see an increase in the amount of poverty and the amount of poor relief. So counties that have a lot of industrialization, a lot of non-agricultural jobs and non-ag wages ought to have higher proportions of poverty and poor relief than counties that have a low level of non-ag jobs and wages. And the third is immigration. If immigration is one of the factors that accounts for the rise in poverty and the existence of poverty in this period, then it ought to be that if we look at the share of the population that's foreign born, and perhaps the share of the population that's non-white, that those things ought to be correlated with poor relief. Because if immigration is the responsibility for the rise in poor relief, then it should be that in counties that have a high share of their population foreign born, that is a lot of immigrants in their county, there ought to be a higher level of poverty and a higher level of poor relief in those counties than there is in the counties with a low level of foreign born. And the same would be true for non-white. So that's the first step, is to look at the data that she gathered from these books that are in the UC Berkeley Library of all places, county level data of the reports that were filed by the commissioners for each of these counties that report the number of people who come and seek relief, the characteristics of those individuals who are receiving relief, whether they are given outdoor relief or indoor relief, and so on. The data for 1823 is in Table 14, which is the regression results table that I think you looked at in section. Yeah. Okay. So we can look at the 40 towns without New York City, or we can look at the larger sample of 250 towns without New York City. Notice I've used both of these are the ones with New York City excluded because New York skews everything. So we're just going to boot New York City, analyze New York City separately, and try to figure out what's going on in the rest of the state. T-stats. The second column in both of these sets of data are T-stats. So what do I want to find? I want to find T-stats that are greater than around 2. 1. Yeah. So it's easy to remember. You can remember a number that has decimals to it. I always just remember 2. So it seems easier. Don't you say 1.9 something? Yeah. Round 2. You want to look for T-stats that are greater than 2. Well, golly. The constant, well, that's a big whoop, isn't it? Here we come down, and there's a T-stat greater than 2. And down over here, here's a T-stat greater than 2. Here's another one greater than 2. Not very many. What does it tell me? It doesn't tell me that this is a failure. It tells me that the old story that says that the urbanization, which is measured by population and population growth rate, that story does not explain the variation in poverty in upstate New York in 1823. That it doesn't seem to be an urbanization story that explains why in some towns there's a lot of people receiving relief and in other towns there's not a lot of people receiving relief. It also tells me the first line that the industrialization story doesn't seem to be the right story. Because if the industrialization story had been the right story, then the coefficients on the percentage of the labor force that was non-ag would have been statistically significant, and they're not. And so it doesn't seem to be an urbanization story. And the third thing this tells us is that the immigration story also does not seem to be borne out by the data. So the historian's longtime story that rising poverty and poor relief in the antebellum years is a result of industrialization, urbanization, and immigration isn't borne out by the data. The data don't support that story. So then what does seem to explain the difference? In Table 15, in your handout from last week, Hannon looks not just at 1823, but at 3 periods, 1823, the 1844 records, and the 1855-59 records. These are not regressions, so this is not putting all this stuff in and estimating an equation. These are correlations. The difference is this. When you run a regression, and you get regression results like we had in the previous slide, you have to specify what's the mathematical way in which you think these variables are related. Do you think it's a linear relationship, so y equals a plus b times x plus c times z, linear? Do you think it's nonlinear, y equals a plus b times x plus c times x squared, so it's nonlinear? Do you think it's log-log, the log of y equals a plus b times the log of x? Do you think it's something more convoluted than this? You have to specify what's the mathematics of the relationship between two variables when you're running regression. You can't just say, here's a whole bunch of data, computer, you figure it out. You have to say, let's try linear. That works well. Let's try nonlinear and see how that works. When you do correlations, and particularly this kind of correlation, which is called a Spearman's rank correlation, this is called a non-parametric method of testing. Non, of course, means not, and parametric parameters. So we're not specifying the parameters. We're not saying ahead of time, I think it's linear, I think it's log linear, I think it's quadratic. We're going to let the data tell us what does it look like. And it may not look like any kind of standard sort of mathematical form that we can think of. But a Spearman's rank correlation says, if when we run the correlations, when we put the data in, if it looks like that for each value of the independent variable, which I'm going to put on the horizontal axis, there is just one value of the, see, I'm doing a crazy function here, I don't even know what this would be, that there is just one value of the dependent variable, then it's going to have a really high Spearman's rank correlation. Because the Spearman's rank correlation is saying that each value of the independent variable is mapping to one value of the dependent variable. So there seems to be something going on whereby the independent variable is determining the value of the dependent variable. So this would have a really high value of the Spearman's rank correlation. Whereas if instead the data looked like this, I'm going to put independent again on the horizontal axis and dependent on the vertical axis. And for each possible value of the independent variable, if there are a lot of different values of the dependent variable, even if it looks like there's sort of a pattern there, but there's lots of different values of the dependent variable for each value of the independent variable, then you're not going to get a very high Spearman's rank correlation. So this thing is looking for, is there a strong connection between each of these independent variables, the stuff down the first column, and the I don't know what we're doing it with the pauperism rate, the share of the population that's receiving relief. Here the stars are being used to indicate what's statistically significant. The t-stats or the standard errors or whatever they are suppressed. I don't remember what's in the original article. And where do we get? So in the 1840s, we get some strong correlation between the share of the non-ag labor force and pauperism. But the big thing that shows up all the way along that affects pauperism in each of these periods is household production. I'll come back to this. The decline in household production means that people don't have their own internal to the family safety net. When households are producing their own linen and their own soap and their own candles and their own I don't know, everything else that you can imagine, right? When they are producing all of their own stuff, then the households have their own safety net. That if there is a decline in income, either because the crop didn't come in the agricultural area, or because there were layoffs at the factory in an area that has jobs, if there's a lot of household production, the family can sustain itself over the term of that decline. So many people, right, started planting vegetables when the economy went bust in 2008. A lot of people said, I'm going to buy a goat. A goat has to eat, but anyway, my friends wanted us to put chickens in our backyard because we have a better backyard for chickens than they do. I saw a coyote just like 5 houses down from my house a few weeks ago. I'm thinking I'm glad that it's not me that has the chickens in the backyard. Somebody else has the chickens. But anyway, with the decline in the economy in 2008, lots of people wanted to be growing their own vegetables, raising their own chickens. Why? Because it provides a safety net. Because then at least you've got your greens, you've got your eggs, you've got your protein. Things get really bad, you can have chicken for dinner. So what do we see here? We see something similar. The decline of household production is strongly correlated with the rise of poverty. There's a question way up at the top. Yeah. No. So no, I didn't mean to say that it's independent of sign. I was just saying that I don't know if these are t-stats. I don't know if the original table had t-stats or standard errors. I just put the stars in this one, and I can't remember what was in the original. But the signs matter. So the signs are telling you that increase in non-ag labor force is positive, so it's associated with an increase in pauperism. But yeah, the signs matter. Yep. No. I think the only time well, here it does. Oh, yes. Okay. So adding in New York City, particularly, I'm not going to talk about why adding in New York City changes this from 95 to 99% statistical significance. That's too spine of a gradation. Why does adding in New York City make a difference in terms of the share of the foreign-born? Probably because the share of the population foreign-born in New York City is a big difference between the share of the population foreign-born in the rest of New York. So I forget what those numbers are, but if you look at what's the population of New York that was foreign-born, big number. What's the population of Albany County that was foreign-born, small number. So without having New York City in there, there's relatively little variation in the share of the population that's foreign-born. You put New York City in, you now have in your sample, you now have a whole lot of variation in the share of the population that's foreign-born. The statistical significance, though, is driven by this one outlier, which is New York City. So you've got a whole lot of observations down over, what's this way for you? Down over here, which is a low share of the population foreign-born. You've got one observation up here that's New York City, but that one observation is really pulling, I don't want to say pulling, it's really giving you some variation that gives you statistical significance. It's the reason why in econometrics we like to throw out the outliers, because if an outlier gives you statistical significance, it doesn't tell you what's probably going on for the rest of the sample. It only tells you what's going on in that one outlier, which in this case is New York City. So it tells you that in New York City, the share of the population foreign-born seems to be important, but it doesn't seem to be important in the rest of the state. Other question, Sam? This here? I think that's because it's before the Erie Canal. So the Erie Canal is finished. Well, then I don't know. I've got so many marks on here, I'm going to erase everything. There it all goes. I don't have a good answer. I have to go back and study the article more carefully. So Sam's question is, should I be worried about the fact that household production is statistically significant in the sample with New York City in 1823 and 1850s, but not in the non-New York City sample? I'm comforted by what happens in the 1840s, but it's a good point. Yeah. All right, any other questions? Where's my thing? So what's the bottom line? The bottom line that Hannum concludes is that rising rural poverty of the able-bodied is due to the commercialization of agriculture and the rise of the factory system, both of which lead to the decline in household production. So I talked about the commercial of agriculture as leading to the decline in household production. The other half that leads to the decline of household production is indeed the rise of the factory system, because that provides cheap alternatives. So now that there are factories where cotton fabric is being made, for instance, and with the transportation network, it's pretty cheap for a family in western upstate New York to buy fabric that was manufactured in Massachusetts, which was not something